you spoke about the privileging that third discrete conceptual moment, right? At the same time, you also say that perhaps the problem here, when we speak about the canonized academia, is that this theoretical moment doesn't unfold, right? The problem here then would be that while they academics, in that sense, might be okay with the idea of debating, discussing, and theoretic in that moment, doing it. I mean, the point that they will not step out on the road, right? And that's the point that is, sort of implicit in what you were saying as well. What we need perhaps is a sort of a bridge, I mean, between the pragmatic moment and the academic moment, which could also be seen in this here as a bridge between the outside, right? You can use references like the factory, the forest, and so on and so forth, and the inside. I mean, which in this case the university, because even as the point, you use the term enactment. What does enactment entail? How do you enact the logic of what the Maoists might be enacting at that moment here? That would entail a sort of stepping out on the road. You cannot simply, at least at this moment when we are discussing the semester system and so on and so forth, it needs to be done.
You see, it is not merely, as we have repeatedly debated this, it is not merely a question of building bridges. Of course, in terms of effects, in terms of appearances, that is so. But my whole point is that this whole question of struggle, class struggle in the theoretical moment, as merely one of the three levels of the university as a moment of struggle, as a larger moment of struggle, it has to be envisaged in a fashion, which is why this Adorno-Althusser comparison is to my mind very illustrative. That theoretical intervention from the position of class struggle should be such that it self-reflexively grasps, even as it is intervening in the moment of theory, that this has to spill over into another moment. So what I am saying is that this inability to step outside is as much a problem of political pragmatics, which is acknowledged, but there is perhaps also a problem in the way this theoretical struggle and the whole question of theory is being conceived per se, where it is being academicized once again. Like Adorno's example that I give, he is pretty spot on when it comes to enacting the singular processual logic as in the realm of theory, as a critique. He himself comes up with that term, that this is the theoretical moment of class struggle. But then what happens? You do that, but then you reify the form in which you conduct that struggle. It is the same problem. Like if a communist party, CP formations, all the CP formations, they would want to sort of hypostatize the form, reify the form in which their own experience has emerged at a certain moment, which is the dominant moment of the practice. It is the same problem onto other moments. Adorno does the same thing, except that he does it in the name of negativity. In fact, in Adorno, negativity becomes a deconstructionist absence. It becomes a non-ontological thing. Whereas negativity is not non-ontological, it is trans-ontological. There is an affirmation that is involved. There is not mere negation. Because mere negation brings you back once again into the being and nothingness. Being and abyss. Right? The whole question is being and the process and becoming. The two completely logically different registers of experience. So that I think is roughly the problem. I know I have kind of muddled it once again, but that is how it is. I mean,
maybe, can you hear me?
Please come here.
This is something which, it's not exactly a question, it can be a comment, but if you as well as correspondence as a group can reflect on this, which is not exactly coming in a certain sense from your presentation, but also I'm taking off from what Adityan was saying, that why does not the bond between students and teacher exist, and he's imagining of a bond because he is arguing that both live within a similar kind of situation, within, for example, the rule of capital, and both are therefore a kind of bond should exist. So what I would like you to reflect and correspondence, there are 2-3 things. For example, why do disciplines which would teach, for example, I come from social science, I teach my students every day about Dalit movement, women's movement, etc., etc. So why do disciplines which would teach n number of subversive theories and movements to their students would ultimately fail to establish the kind of linkage which Adityan was referring to, kind of bond in fight against, here you have the Vice Chancellor, you have the administration, but the larger system in fact. Because this may also help us to understand the truth behind why the students and teachers do not really develop that bond which is required. This may also happen because the teachers and students fail to engage with the spheres of their functionality. For example, fail to realize that both of them, are equally repressed by the rule of capital. The third one is that the teacher would say, if I say all these things to a teacher, teacher would say, what are you saying? Are you asking me to tell my students that you should go on a strike against the administration? Our task is not that. And you have n number of examples. We don't have the time. I would have counted from fingertips across the universities in Delhi itself, where teachers become mediators between the students and the administrators.
Or the rule of capital.
And administration. So, how would one explain that? And lastly, why does it always happen? Which is, in a sense, I'm going back to the earlier point that I was making. Why does it always happen that the experience which determines our theoretical experience, as Horkheimer would say, fail to enact itself in a reverse manner of fomenting action by different agencies within a university where the frameworks are taught and discussed every day? If we know that we are teaching, for example, Dalit sociology in a certain sense, it is something which has come into being after a whole years of experience, decades and centuries of experience. Why that notion of resistance, that notion of subversion, which was inbuilt into that movement, fails to act itself when we teach that within the classroom? Where does it stop? Are we as teachers stop that? Do we put a full stop? And through our method of engagement, through our methods of teaching, etc., etc. I think correspondence will also be in a better position to tell me about that, because their students would be feeling that within the classrooms as well. And you as an external to the university will have a different position maybe towards explaining this.
Not really, not a very different position. As I was answering Paresh's question, I think part of the answer to your comment is also a response to your comment is partially there to my answer to his question, which was basically one that the whole question of this bond that Adityan talks about, that you talk about, I think that it reminds me of the statement, I don't remember where exactly, it is one from the early Greek philosophers, or perhaps from Montaigne, which Derrida uses in his Politics of Friendship, with which he begins. He says, "Oh my friends, there are no friends." So that is really the situation, you see, in the sense that the bond that you talk about is not a pre-given, an a priori bond. The fact of friendship, when somebody says, "Oh my friends, there are no friends," he is talking about a formational friendship. A friendship that has no necessity built into it, right? Necessity or determination. And it is completely a moment of grace, completely a contingent moment, which would mean, once again, not to absolutize contingency, but contingency as a logical, critical inverse of necessity. So contingency emerges in critique or in struggle. So what I am basically saying is, like you said, that this whole question of segregated, discrete experiences of students and teachers, everybody and karmacharis, everybody being pilloried and bulldozed by the rule of capital. But how to generalize this experience? Because in facing this experience itself, and in responding to it, you are already constitutive of capital. As these days I'm very fond of saying that there is nothing glorious per se in a struggle. Because struggle is given in capital. It is what is the ground of struggle. Are you redefining, resignifying, reconfiguring the antithetical ground? The antithetical ground is given. Without labor there is no capital. Right? If capital were to destroy labor completely, there would be no capital left. I mean, in a logical sense. So the contradiction already exists within capital. How do you re-envisage that contradiction? So that is where the real problem comes. Each one of us is in an antithetical mode vis-a-vis the agents of capital, administration in this instance. But the question is, we are only in responding in that fashion, in that manner, we are only sort of reinforcing the entire dualized thing. How do we reconfigure the moment of struggle? Which is how the bond develops, through that struggle. That each experience in its formal specificity gets the general logical. But this generalization can only happen through struggle and through nothing. Struggle, why? Because struggle is the process through which the critique or the logical inverseness of necessity or determination, which is contingency, is positive. How will this struggle happen? In terms of organization, the brass tacks of organization. I have a feeling that, to come to your question of why do we teach Dalit theory and yet not get it? The question is, there is some problem in the way Dalit theory is taught, received and studied. Even if one were to say that teaching of Dalit theory or teaching of Marxism is in a critical register, but it is in a critical register only in the theoretical moment. What does that critical register mean? The unfolding of it. And this unfolding can only happen, if we were to talk in organizational terms, when something, which is why academics beyond academia, outside of classrooms, not as a determination and as a necessity of academics, pursuit of academics per se, but as a spilling over from that into another moment of political action, that theory is debated, thrashed out. And from that, spilling over once again, in that modality, that debating theory would mean action also. Spilling over of theory into action. If that can be envisaged, and that space I think can be envisaged by an organization like Correspondence, or these, because I frankly believe that we are in a pre-party stage. None of these parties are communist parties, honestly, if you ask. So the only way, we are almost at the time of Marx and not really Lenin, when Marx was about to build his first international. So we are in that state. So how do you bring this generalization in organizational terms about? This can only happen by making theoretical enterprise, theoretical endeavor, in a fashion that you grasp the full implication of it, not merely as a critique. And that can happen through spaces like the Correspondence. Correspondence being one, there are many other groups. New Socialist Initiatives is another group, for instance. I've heard that I have never really had the opportunity to be part of their activities or attend them, but whatever one learns of them, about them from many of their comrades. So these are spaces where that generalization can happen.
Adityan said that. So I think I would like to give and very specific two comments. One is about when you deal with the category of work, whether we capital in the specific location of university, would you consider a sort of difference between the category of labor and category of work, and try to then analyze the labor as a force category, as a force on the worker, on the students, either in university or factory, and work is more sort of a category which deals with what you are basically trying to establish through creativity, which is creativity is, I guess, is linked up much more with the idea of work, not with the labor. And what we sort of, I mean, it's about, can we think about the whole paper if you divide in these two categories of work and labor. Secondly, you mentioned about left organizations, specifically I think about student organizations. I was wondering whether your assertion about that most of this left politics or student politics in the university is either focused on the factory or slums or forest, is that assertion actually correct? Is it theoretical assertion, or it's actually factually you see that that's what happens in the university? Because when I recall my association with the university, there are a number of occasions and instances and struggles where not only left student organization but also teachers organization were very much focused how university as a location has been transformed in the interest of capital, and that kind of struggle when one can see irrespective of our differences either on fee hike, on semester system and a number of other issues. So I think what do you mean by that needs to be, if you elaborate on that, it will be very interesting to understand.